My future in-laws mocked my low status. They regret it now. I'd always been proud of my professionalism and ability to stay calm under pressure. Building a company from scratch is a full-time job, and marriage wasn't something I'd ever considered. I was happy on my own, and work had always been my focus. So when Douglas Collins, the president of a longtime partner company, proposed, I was surprised. He wanted to introduce me to his son Jack, who was around my age and someone I'd never heard of. Despite our years of business collaboration, I wasn't sure about the proposal, but I was curious. Jack seemed polite when we first met. He had a gentle demeanor and I found myself entertained by his company. He was courteous, charming, and attentive, everything one might hope for in a partner. I'd been urged into the idea of marriage, and despite my own reservations, I thought it was worth a try. My future in-laws mocked my low status. They regret it now. I'd always been proud of my professionalism and ability to stay calm under pressure. Building a company from scratch is a full-time job, and marriage wasn't something I'd ever considered. I was happy on my own, and work had always been my focus. So when Douglas Collins, the president of a longtime partner company, proposed, I was surprised. He wanted to introduce me to his son Jack, who was around my age and someone I'd never heard of. Despite our years of business collaboration, I wasn't sure about the proposal, but I was curious. Jack seemed polite when we first met. He had a gentle demeanor and I found myself entertained by his company. He was courteous, charming, and attentive, everything one might hope for in a partner. I'd been urged into the idea of marriage, and despite my own reservations, I thought it was worth a try. We began seeing each other, and I could sense Mr. Collins' enthusiasm about the possibility of our marriage. Jack appeared eager as well. Well, this made me think that maybe it could work. 5 weeks into our relationship, Jack and I went on another date. He was confident, maybe even a bit cocky, wearing a casual jacket and acting like he owned the world as we sat down at a restaurant I really liked, though Jack didn't know that. He smiled at me and said, "You probably don't come to places like this often. Must be quite a treat, huh?" His words stung a bit, but I kept my composure. He clearly thought I felt like I was on another level from him. I didn't have the same exposure to fine dining or luxury. It was a small but telling sign that made me realize there were parts of Jack that I hadn't fully understood. His arrogance didn't end there. During another outing, he noticed the watch I was wearing and tried to flaunt it. "This is pretty high-end," he said, offering it for me to take a closer look. I thanked him politely and tried to change the subject. But he kept pushing it towards me, as if I'd never seen anything so luxurious. I felt a pang of irritation. I hadn't revealed my real status or my role in the business world. I did that partly because I wanted Jack to know me for who I was, not for my professional accomplishments. But his constant need to appear superior was wearing me down. 3 months into our relationship, Jack proposed to me. He made it seem romantic and impromptu, asking me to marry him. One night when we were parked outside my house, he said, "Let's make this official." He smiled as if everything between us had been perfect. He wanted me to quit my job, move in with him, and learn household duties from his mother. Even at 48 years old, my excitement evaporated in that moment. I felt a growing unease. "Quit my job," I echoed, feeling a swell of disbelief. I couldn't imagine giving up the career I had worked so hard to build. It was really difficult to put in all that work just to become someone's housewife. Jack was genuinely surprised that I would react this way. He tried to recover by laughing it off as though it were a joke, but I could tell the damage was already done. I told him we needed a break, and I left feeling pretty doubtful. The following weekend, Jack pleaded for another chance. He said he was under pressure from his friends, who had convinced him that laying down the law would be the right approach. He seemed sincere, and for a moment I was willing to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man who made me laugh, and who had looked at me with genuine warmth, was still in there somewhere. I agreed to give him another chance, telling myself that nobody is perfect. A month later, it was finally time for me to meet his family. Despite everything, I was optimistic. Jack had been on his best behavior lately, and I was hopeful that his family would be welcoming. I had heard about his father, Douglas Collins, for years. Jack was always professional and courteous in business, but his mother, Kelly, was another story. I didn't know what to expect from her as Jack and I entered his parents' grand home. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The mansion was huge and the opulence almost overwhelmed me. As soon as we stepped into the living room, Mrs. Kelly Collins greeted me, but not with warmth. She took a glass of champagne from the table, walked over to me and splashed it right in my face. I was shocked. My skin stung, my eyes burned, and the cold liquid dripped from my hair onto my carefully chosen dress. "I've eliminated the stench of poverty for you," she said with a smirk. "You should be grateful." Her voice was cold, mocking, and filled with disdain. The laughter that followed was even more painful. Jack stood beside her, laughing as if he found the whole thing amusing. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had expected nerves, perhaps awkwardness, but not outright hostility. I dressed my best, done my hair, and tried to look the part of someone worthy of their son. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All of my efforts, all of my attempts to make things work felt pointless. My heart sank as I wiped my face, my fingers trembling. Jack's laughter cut through me like a knife. I realized that I was standing there alone, without any support from the man I had thought I might spend the rest of my life with. In that moment, something inside me, I snapped. I wasn't going to let myself be treated this way, not by Kelly, not by Jack, not by anyone. I straightened my back and took a step away from them. "I'm terminating our partnership," I said, my voice unwavering despite the storm of emotions inside me. Jack and Kelly both looked at me in confusion, their laughter dying on their lips before they could say anything. Mr. Collins entered the room, his eyes going wide as he took in the scene. My dripping face. Kelly, I was holding an empty champagne glass, and Jack looked like he'd just realized he'd made a mistake. "Mr. Collins," I started off calm and professional. "I thanked you for your cooperation over the years, but due to what happened today, I think it's best we end our business relationship and any personal arrangements that were planned." Kelly's face paled as I spoke, and Jack's eyes were wide with shock. He was opening and closing his mouth as if he was trying to say something. He couldn't find the words to respond. Mr. Collins looked between us, his face filled with confusion. He had no idea what had just happened, but he knew enough to realize that things had gone terribly wrong. Jack stammered, stepping towards me. His voice was shaky. "Emma, you're serious, you're ending everything." Then Mr. Collins cleared his throat. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding. He looked at his wife, at his son, and then back at me. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Taylor. I never wanted it to come to this. I'd made my decision. I'd given him enough chances, and each time he'd shown me exactly who he was. Now I was finally ready to walk away." As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The weight that had been pressing down on me for weeks seemed to lift. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I'd allowed myself to be dragged into a situation that was beneath me, all for the sake of trying to fit into someone else's world. I was trying to fit into someone else's world, but I realized I needed to stop. I was trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve me. I drove home, thinking about the events of the evening. I knew I had made the right choice, but I was still upset about Jack's betrayal. He had laughed at me and allowed his mother to humiliate me without saying anything. I couldn't forgive him. The next day, I called a meeting. I told my board of directors that I was ending our partnership with Collins Enterprises. There were a few surprised looks around the room, but no one questioned my judgment. They knew me well enough to trust that I had good reasons for my actions. Mr. Collins reached out to me several times over the following weeks, trying to convince me to reconsider. He apologized profusely for his wife's behavior and for Jack's immaturity, but I remained firm. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going back on it. Collins Enterprises was struggling, and I knew that my company was their lifeline, but I couldn't allow myself to be tied to people who treated me with such disrespect. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I focused on my work, on expanding my business, and on finding new partnerships that aligned with my values. I threw myself into my hobbies, reading, working out, taking up new challenges. The experience with Jack had taught me an important lesson. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was strong, successful, and capable on my own. One day, about a year after that fateful evening, I ran into Mr. Collins at a business event. He looked older and more worn out, and the sadness in his eyes was evident. He approached me, offering a tentative smile. "Miss Taylor," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "You know, Mr. Collins, I appreciate that. I hope things are better for you now." He sighed, shaking his head. "Jack's struggling. He never quite recovered after you left. Kelly, well, she's gone. Left him behind when things got tough." There was a part of me that felt sorry for Jack for everything he'd lost, but I also knew that he'd brought it upon himself. He'd allowed his mother to influence him too much, to poison his thoughts, and he never found the strength to stand up for what was right. And in the end, he paid the price. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew that I made the right decision for myself, and that's what mattered most. Mr. Collins looked at me, his eyes filled with a kind of wistful admiration. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for, Miss Taylor, Jack. He could have learned a lot from you." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. We all have to make our own choices in life, and I chose to walk away. With that, I turned and walked away from Mr. Collins, feeling at peace with the choices I had made. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, but I had come out stronger on the other side. That was something no one could take from me. I realized that my life was my own, and I was determined to make the most of it. I wanted to find happiness on my own terms, to live a life that I was proud of. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. My own strength, my own sense of self-worth, and the courage to walk away from anything that didn't serve me. And that was more than enough.